This episode, Tools, Borrow, Rent, or Buy, a Handyman's Dilemma. In this episode, the Handyman Pros discuss one of our favorite topics, tools and equipment. More specifically, John and I talk about rental versus purchase, some of the factors and considerations, cost, and other pertinent issues. Welcome to the Handyman Pros radio show, home improvement and maintenance tips from the pros. Thanks for listening to another edition of the Handyman Pros radio show, where our goal is to help save you time, money, and aggravation on your home maintenance and repair. This edition's entitled Tools, Rent or Buy, a Handyman's Dilemma. To help me explain, I'm here with my ever-cheerful co-host and old buddy John. John, this week, tell me more.
What I've been doing?
Yeah,
Yeah, what I've been doing. Well, you know what? I got to tell you that I replaced a 40-year-old shower cartridge, for the diverter. And, it was one of those things where you're
praying.
Number one, you're like, folks, you can buy new cartridges and things. That this is like, you pull out, this was you pull this, your faucet out in your shower, and you turn it left and right, hot and cold, that type of thing, right? So this one of the customers had this thing and it was leaking, and it was old, man. It was 40 years old, and so anyways, I found one online and bought this thing. I couldn't believe it, because that everything in plumbing, there's always something different, for all these, especially 40 years old. How the heck I found that, I have no idea. Anyways, it was one of those, moments that you pray when you're trying to pull this thing out.
Yeah, because they never come out, right?
Especially for you folks that live in areas where you have really hard water and things like that, that will really lock in these cartridges, and they're all different, between Deltas and Moens and, all these older cartridges. And you have to get cartridge pullers sometimes, specific tools that you can pull these things out. Now, I didn't have to get a specific tool for this, thank goodness. It was one of those moments where you pray while you're doing it, because this thing, it was plastic, and if it breaks off in there, I'm looking at having to install a whole new diverter valve, and what a mess that causes, right? So, it came out.
It was a miracle. It was a miracle.
A miracle happened, and I put the new one in, and it worked like a charm,
like it's supposed to. Oh, yeah, that way, yeah.
Back at it, I was like, wow, okay. But that was one of those things where a lot of times when you're doing this, it takes a specialized tool to take these things out of there, or a lot of times a specialized tool do a lot of things, right?
For any job, right? Any job,
so
yeah. It's not just doing this.
You and I both have discussions about this all the time. Now Larry and I both have a lot of tools, and probably a lot of you folks out there have a lot of tools. I accumulated a lot of tools being a mechanic, but there's other tools that I just don't own because it doesn't make sense that I rent it.
Right.
Okay. So Larry and I are going to talk about, is it
yeah, we're going to give you some ideas on when do you rent, when do you buy, and when do you borrow if you can, right? So,
right.
So there's a bunch of things. So there's that old adage, John, borrow it, rent it, own it, right? So my thing is if I've got a specialized job, and when I talk about a specialized job for me, I've got 8 billion tools, right, like you do. And we do this professionally, folks, so we have more tools than most people would have. And my qualifications on purchasing tools have to do with a lot of different factors, right, John? And I know you have them too. What are your factors? Like, what are your factors? What are your concerns when we talk about, getting a tool? Right. What do you do?
Well, it's exactly. How many times are you actually going to use it? Number one. Okay. Is this something I'm going to, be repetitive with? Like a drill. that's a no-brainer for us. Okay, I'm using a drill every single day. Okay, but as a mechanic, I never pulled out a lot of engines all the time. For instance, I'll give you an example. So I rented engine hoists. Okay, so it's things like that. So it's really that kind of thing. Plus what is the investment, and is that really balanced off with the amount of time I'm going to use it and what the value I'm going to get out of it. So there are certain things that you want to rent, or as you put it, borrow, that if you can get your hands on it, that you don't necessarily need to buy because you're never going to use it. And then if I do get something, right, do I have the place to store it?
Yeah, that's a biggie for me.
So take, for example, this engine hoist. You've seen these things, right?
Oh, they're big. They're big. And it's
like, if I bought one of those, and I was doing this a lot, and I bought one, I can't store it.
Right.
So that there is another data point for me that no, I'm just going to go rent it because they're very inexpensive, versus buying it. And for how long I'm really going to use it.
And that's a great example of, actually, folks, I'm just going to talk about, if you're doing an engine hoist for a car, which is what what we're talking about, right, John?
Yes.
So, they're not terribly expensive. They really aren't. They really, really aren't that terribly expensive. I mean, if you go to the Harbor Freights or the Northern Tools and all, they're only They're only like a couple of $100, which really isn't that much money for tools. But that storage issue is huge for the amount of times that you use it. Because I same situation as you did, John. I was doing an engine swap. Don't ask, it was a long time ago. And but I was doing an engine swap, and I'm like, do I buy this thing or do I? And I was like, man, I've got no place to keep it. And then it's so big, it's like it's going to take up a huge portion of space. So my thing on that one was based on storage. I'm like, no, I don't want to store this thing. I'm going to rent one, and I did. I rented one, and I used it for like a week or something. I took a weekly rental on it, and I took it back to him. I said, here you go. And actually, that's one I actually borrowed. I take that back. I had a buddy that had one, and again, that's one of those things. I had a friend that had one. We borrowed it. He rented it. It's kind of one of those things that let's talk about that for just one second, Johnny. So so number one, know what your friends have. Like, the first place to borrow, know what your friends have. But I don't know if many people are available. That most major municipalities have tool rental libraries, right? So, like, there's one here in Atlanta. I can't remember the name of it, but I think it's the Atlanta Tool Library, actually. And you can go online and just do a search, do tool rental libraries, and if there's one around, you'll come up with one. Now, they're just like a lending library. They usually charge a deposit, et cetera, et cetera. But it's very, very nominal to borrow it. Provide, you get a certain amount of time, and then after that, you pay a late fee, just like a book on your books. But pretty interesting concept of borrowing it, especially for things that you might not use that often, or you don't have space to store it. Something, for example, like a tile saw. If you don't have space to store a tile saw, and you're only going to do it once every 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 years, don't buy it. Borrow it if you can, and then
right.
we'll talk about renting it. But I just wanted people to understand what your friends have, because, like, John, you and I, we trade tools back and forth. If you need something for a specific job, like, I have an SDS drill. We'll talk about that in a bit. But I have a drill, a concrete drill, and John's borrowed it a couple of times to do jobs just because he doesn't need to buy one. I've got one, and we're close enough that it's worthwhile for us to get together and trade tools if we need it. So that's one of those things on borrowing it. If you can borrow it. Then you're out nothing. But the rest of this conversation, let's talk about rental versus own, right? Rental versus own. So where do you want to go with that, John? You want to talk about some of the power tools or some of the equipment, some of that stuff?
Well, for instance, if you're doing a big job, I mean, are you really gonna go out and buy something like a big scissor lift?
Probably not.
Yeah, right.
So I struggled with that personally on a Bobcat, right? So I wanted to buy a skid steer loader,
yeah.
right? I still do. I really want to buy a skid steer loader.
Well, that's because that'd be a big toy for you.
Well, that's really the reason.
So you got to control yourself there.
Well, that's it. So do I really need it, right? Back to the tool concerns. Do I really need it? Well, I can justify that I need it, but do I really need it? No. And then the second thing is that's a very large investment. It's a lot of money. And I'll tell you, the thing that turned me off the most on buying a skid steer loader was maintenance. Now, along with a place to store it, which is part of that maintenance, that particular piece of equipment requires a lot of maintenance. So you've got to change the oil, and you've got hydraulic fluids, and you've got broken teeth on the skid buckets, and you've got, the buckets get bent, the tools get bent, blah 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 blah. There's a lot of maintenance on a tool like that.
That's an expensive piece of equipment, and if you're not turning money with it, that's an expensive asset to have, unused.
Yeah, and it's actually one, we'll talk about it a little bit when we get into some of the finances of it, because it's amazes me. Anyway, like I say, we'll get on it. But let's talk about something more that's kind of a purpose-driven tool for somebody.
Something. Well, I think the example of a wet tile saw. Okay.
Yes.
Now, if you're going to do a lot of tile work, it probably, if you're going to do like your bathroom and you've got backsplashes and you've got other things to do and you're doing a house, renovation or a remodel that you're going to do yourself, then it probably pays for you to buy one.
Right.
If you're just going to do, the one day backsplash thing, you can go rent really nice ones. Now that's the difference, right? You can go out and buy cheap tools, or you can go rent really nice ones. And so that you kind of balance this out for what we just talked about, how long you're going to use it and storage and so on and so forth. But it
is a real balancing act. It's funny, and
it's a real balancing act and you have to weigh both sides on this thing.
Because to use that example, John, right? And you know this, but let's explain it to the customer. The rental rates on that tile saw that you're talking about, you can literally buy one for maybe less or maybe $10 more than the daily rental rate, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're going to use that tool, let's say you're doing a DIY project, and say you're doing a backsplash, and you're not a tile, you haven't done much in the way of tiles and stuff, and you want a tile saw, and you're going to use it over a period of like 2 weeks, you need to consider buying one. Right? Because the daily rent, now there's daily, weekly, and monthly rental rates, right? So I don't know if folks are aware of that, but the longer you keep it, the less money it is usually. But still, in that case, you can buy an inexpensive tile saw for less than the daily rate. And those inexpensive tile saws, I bought one, I know, I've used it. It works pretty well. It really isn't that bad. I mean, like, you can do pretty professional work with it. It's kind of amazing, actually, how good it is. And if you change the blade on it, you're even better, because it's the blades that are really what's critical there in most cases. But anyway, be that as it may, that's a really good example of, do you buy or do you rent? Now, if you don't have space to rent it, or you really are doing a one-time job, rent it. Rent one. Get a really good one and rent it. Right?
Yeah, and that's to my point, is that you can rent a really top of the line tool, and we're talking about water saw here. It doesn't matter, but it's versus buying a cheap one. I'd rather use a really nice tool and get the right fit and finish that I want, with a professional tool than that. So the other thing is that when you always go into somebody's house, and there's always that one tool that's sitting there, right? Well, when's the last time you used that?
You sound like my wife. Careful.
Yeah. Here it is, man. I hear it all the time. Well, when was the last time you used that thing? How often are you going to use that? Well, it's been sitting there forever. There's all kinds of thoughts on how to alleviate that one, right? Whether you're going to resell it, or whatever, but don't be that guy, right? That has a bunch of stuff that you invested a whole lot of money and you'd used it one time, and it's taken up a whole lot of space. At least I don't want to be that guy anymore. All the tools that I have, I'm generally using them all the time.
Pretty much.
So yeah. So
I have mine broken into areas, right? So I have my plumbing box, I have my tiling box, I have all this stuff, and when I'm doing those jobs, those boxes come out and everything in there gets used pretty much. But how often do those boxes come out? Well, for me, it works, right? For me, I don't buy things unless I have multiple uses lined up for them. For me, and that it compromises both rental houses and through the handyman business. So we John and I are fortunate that most of the time we can buy tools because we'll use tools at some time or another. And one of that tool we were just talking about, that SDS Drill, that actually has opened up new areas of businesses for us. So an SDS Drill is a very large drill that has a hammer. It usually has a hammer function on it, so it's used for drilling concrete and things like that. And it's also used as a chisel as well. So one of the other things that I take into a point is how many multi-uses can I get out of a particular tool, right, John? And that sometimes makes a difference as to whether or not I purchase versus rent. So, kind of going back to the Bobcat example, I'd love a Bobcat because there is not much in the world of digging that you can't do with a Bobcat, right? I'll never buy one because of as I said, the maintenance. But it's actually, folks, I'm gonna let that cat out of the bag. If you're thinking about owning a piece of equipment like that, a tractor, a Bobcat, or something like that, you really need to look at the monthly and yearly rental rates, because I'll tell you, on a Bobcat, renting it makes more sense than buying it. If you run the numbers out over a 5-year period, you have to. My numbers ran, I'm buying it with just a bucket without adding any attachments to it. I would have had to work that thing like 240 days. Now, this is new as well, buying it new. I would have had to have worked it like 240 days a year to make it pay for itself. And I said to myself, that doesn't work when I can rent it for $300 a day or $800 a week or something like that. I can't remember. And it came with a trailer and all of that kind of thing. So in that sense, do that analysis. Is it cheaper to buy it, or is it cheaper to own it, or is it cheaper to rent it because of maintenance issues? And on equipment, I would tell you that's something you really need to be consideration. Even on these wet tile saws, like a wet tile saw, John, a blade, if you're buying one, if you haven't bought one, they're $50 or $60 each.
Exactly. So there's a lot. I mean, your equation right there is a good example. Now, a lot of people might be doing some things in their backyard, and they're like, well, boy, it sure would be nice to have a big piece of equipment and knock this job out. Hey, man, go down and rent a Bobcat, right? For like your example, $300, and you just saved yourself what, 2 or 3 weeks of work,
Should we talk about the wall, John, that I did with a wheelbarrow?
Yeah. So it really is those things. And then you know what? You put it on the trailer, you take it back and go, okay, see you later.
Yeah, have a nice day.
$300, boy, that's a bargain. I mean, that's a real bargain, So there is that example. Then there's other types of, examples that it just makes more sense to buy it and then figure out a way to, sell it again.
Yeah.
Sell it on a website, Craigslist or through
Facebook
Nextdoor
or any number of
I'm
any
seeing
number of places.
People on Nextdoor all the time that are getting rid of tools.
Yep.
They're getting rid of tools, or people are asking, hey, does anybody have something?
Yep.
These are great ways to, cut your investment, and save yourself a headache instead of looking at that, when are you going to use that again type of thing.
John, are you feeling some pressure?
No. I generally use everything now that I have, but it's kind of funny, For a while there, I didn't. It was like, what are you going to buy that for?
I don't know. What are you buying those pairs?
It's cool. It's great in the garage.
Yeah. What are you buying those shoes for? Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
did I just say that? Oh, my wife's actually great. She rarely ever says those kinds of things to me but she's a minimalist, and so for her, she's forever wanting to throw things away, and I'm like, no, you can't throw away my tools. No, I make money with those tools, so you can't do that. But
so a couple of examples, Larry, of what you have here, in terms of tools. Okay. Like, power, if you got a clogged toilet,
yes,
instead of calling a plumber,
correct.
Go rent a professional snake, for what, like $60 a day? Something
like that. Yeah.
Okay. Now, you don't need to have that thing sitting around forever.
Nope.
It's $60. You just saved yourself,
More than
$150 just for the guy to show up, plus a $300 bill.
Yep.
So,
and that's a super good example too. And that is something you really, unless I have a snake, John, but I don't use. I use
we
it.
use it. We use them all the time. Okay?
Yeah. I mean, I use it enough to own it. And it's funny, folks. Like the other thing, and we talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to talk about it again. I'm a big multi-tool user, right? So I like tools that I can use multiple things. My plumbing snake, I've used it more for cleaning out gutters than I have plumbing clogs. So, folks, it works for gutters as well. So if you get the downspout gets clogged, either run it up from the bottom or run it down from the top, doesn't matter. Run that snake through there. All that stuff will come pounding out. It's amazing, right? I mean, it's a multiple use. It becomes an indoor-outdoor tool for me. We were talking about this SDS drill that I have that you've borrowed, but John, I bought some chisel bits for it. I was doing some brickwork, and I needed to make a big 4-inch hole to put a dryer vent through. And I bought the bit, and all of a sudden now I have a jackhammer, a very small jackhammer, but it works as a jackhammer, so I can pop.
Absolutely,
I can pop stuff out. So multiple uses, and then this as well. They also work as drills, just regular straight drills. Now I don't ever need a drill that's
that big,
big, but. If you need a drill that big every once in a while, say you even just want to run a mixing paddle for drywall or something, there's another use for it. Mm-hmm. So it's think about the other uses for it as well as one of your considerations, because not everything is just, they might be a one-time tool, but they're not always a one-time tool. So anyway, sorry, I went off on a little diatribe there, but
no, and then you have another example, of one of these cement mixers. So if you're going to pour like a patio, right?
Yes.
Man, save your back.
Oh.
Go out and spend the $50 a day or whatever it is for one of these smaller cement mixers and just get it done.
And the other thing is there's actually we hadn't really talked about this, but there is that quality of product, okay? And concrete is a super good example. If you have, let's say you're going to pour a patio and you're going to mix 50 bags of concrete. I know this because I've done it. Mm-hmm. So, folks, before you think about mixing 50 bags of concrete in a wheelbarrow, number one, go out and mix 1 bag of concrete in a wheelbarrow. Make sure it's good the way it's supposed to be. But understand that when you get to 50, by the time you try to do it by hand, 50 bags of concrete, that concrete that you poured initially is already starting to harden. And this creates a bad product. So it actually, and there's structural issues in concrete and things like that, but it starts to dry and you don't want to do that. So you need to be able to do it in a timely fashion and you need to be able to get it done. That's why if you watch them pour big slabs of concrete out there in the world, they've got the concrete trucks lined up. Right?
Yep.
If you've ever seen it, there'll be 4 or 5 trucks in a line, and the first guy pulls in, he pours. Second guy pulls in, and he pours. And it's just a revolving door, and that's because of the factors of concrete. That to get a good pour, as they call it, a good pour, they've got to all be in there in a certain amount of time. They can't do it. They can't just string it out. You don't slab concrete up against slab and expect it to be one piece. So there's that as well. It's quality of product, and using that concrete mixer that you're just talking about. If you're going to do a bunch of concrete, save your back. Oh my God.
Right.
Oh my God.
Right.
And those things they're perfect. Plus you just dump it straight in, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of reasons to do it. So yeah, there's that. And what other things we got, John? What are some of the other factors?
The last example I'd give here is, let's go to one that does not make sense. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's the smaller tools like an angle grinder.
Yes.
If you're gonna use an angle, if you're making something, whatever that might be, and it requires an angle grinder, you just go buy that thing. It's not much to store. They're not that expensive anymore.
$20 for a 110 one.
And you can get and you can also if you never use it again, everybody's looking for one, so you can sell it.
You can sell it easily, yeah.
So it's one of those things. So it's kind of, here's this balancing act again with all the variables here in this equation we're talking about to rent or buy. So
the other thing on that angle grinder, John, and we've talked about this before, but you don't understand how many different uses that angle grinder has. Go walk the aisle and look at 4.5-inch discs and find out what you can actually do with it. So it's not just for grinding. You can cut with it. You can sand with it. John, we got those sanding discs for them, right? Because we were doing a lot of wood rot repair.
Flap discs,
flap discs work great. Like if you got to take a lot of material off quick, That's the way. And then you finish sand it afterwards. But if you got a lot of there's a ton you can do with those things. So back to that, that's at Multi-Tool. Yeah. So that one is definitely like, it's a no to rent. Because what? They're like $20 a day to rent, right, John? Something like that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is crazy. Yeah. You can literally buy one for that. You can buy it for that.
Right. And this is almost one of those tools. So if you're a DIYer, you probably want to buy one of these anyways.
Yeah, you kind of need it. It's more you'll find out if you have one and you put a couple of different discs on it, you'll find out like, why did I not have one of these before?
Yeah, exactly. So, I think it gets back to that, what project that you're going to do. Don't let some of this hold you up. If you're really ambitious and you're getting into a project and you're saying, well, I really don't have that tool, or this is, it's going to require this or that. I'm sure most of everybody out there knows that you can rent these kind of tools, whether it be at the big box stores or it's specialty rental places. And you really don't. It's kind of one of those things where you're driving down the road and you pass by these rental places a lot. And if you don't need them, you're like, yeah, I wonder what that place does.
Exactly. Yep.
And they got everything.
They've got everything.
You walk in and the guy's like, yep, I got that. Here it is. I used to rent those salamander heaters.
Yep.
Those kerosene heaters for when I lived in Chicago. Rented them and they were cheap. I'd rent them and just put it in the garage and be done with it, and then take it back.
I had
a lot of weeks worth of work, and I need that heater and I need that engine hoist.
Yeah, and one of the other things too is especially the local yards, we'll call them the what you're talking about, John. You're driving down the road and you're like, Terry's Tool Rental. They're a local company where I live. And it's like, you go, well, what does Terry's actually do? Well, Terry's does all kinds of things along with equipment. He rents out things like ladders. So if you need particularly a taller ladder and a nice ladder, like a taller ladder, if you want a 16 or plus foot step ladder, he's got them. That is not something, in my opinion, that unless you're going to use it every day, you don't want to buy it. You got to store it and blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, go rent it,
And they usually have the top of the line ladders.
Yes.
Ladders, in this case, are very expensive. Top of the line ladders are very expensive. So you have to consider, what that ladder means to you. You want to be on a good ladder if you're going to get up there. Okay.
Yeah, right.
So, you're right on. You're dead on right there with renting something like a ladder.
Yeah, but the local guys have that stuff. Now you go to the big box stores like an HD. I don't believe they rent ladders. I don't think so. Pretty sure they don't.
I don't know, but you're right. So these little local places, you just don't know who they are until you're out scouting around to find this. So these guys have everything. You want that, they'll rent it. You want this, they got. It's really a nice deal.
And half the time they actually know how to use the stuff too.
Correct.
So there's that. We've had that come from a couple other shows about, like, particularly our carpet show. He said, go to the local guys. They know everything. And I'm kind of like, that's sort of my opinion on the tool rentals too. You go to the local tool rental guy. He really knows what he's got, and he knows how to. He'll give you tips and tricks on how to use it and what works. And what works for your area. And that sometimes can be very invaluable information. And they tend to be nicer too. So whatever.
Yeah, and one of the easiest thing to think about is a trailer, right?
Yes.
Everybody's gone down. They're moving. What do? U-Haul.
Yeah, you call U-Haul.
You go rent a trailer, right? So, this is the same type of thing. I'm not going to buy a trailer. I'll go rent it.
So John, you needed a turbo encapsulator for that last time when the spaceship landed, and you had a particular piece you needed to take off of the turbo encapsulator. Did you go rent the tool for that?
Larry, I took the whole thing apart, man. I'm telling you, any of you DIYers out there, you see something like that, you just don't look at it. You got to take it apart.
Got to take it apart, baby. Got to take it apart. All right, folks. Well, if you've enjoyed the Handyman Pros Radio Show, please tell your friends and neighbors. We really appreciate it. If there is anything that you would like us to do a topic on, send us an email. That's questions@handymanprosradioshow.com. You can send us some suggestions. We'd love to do something that y'all want to hear about, something besides what we blather on about. And we would appreciate that. You can also put that out on our Facebook group. That's @Handyman Pros. And you can follow us on Twitter @Handyman Radio. We want to thank you for listening. We will see you next week on the Handyman Pros Radio Show.